All right, well, hopefully you found that interesting, how they discovered feature detectors with the cat's brain responding to the slide being pulled out. So that was kind of an interesting discovery. So we definitely analyze the features of a stimulus. We actually kind of engage in a three-step process as we go through the analysis by synthesis process according to this theory. First, you extract out from the sensory register those factors that are individual features. So you pull out the straight lines, the curved lines, the different colors, the lights and shadows. You pull out these individual features initially. You extract those. Then you go through the identification process where you match those features to feature templates. So you don't have to do it as a whole like in the template theory. You do the individual features to the templates. This is going to produce a shorter list than if you had to have every single individual object represented as its own template. So this makes it a little bit faster. And then you ultimately synthesize these individual features into a particular object that you're recognizing. And the thing that has the most overlapping features is probably what this object is. So if it has, a lot of things that come together and have a lot of overlap with a dog, you're probably going to identify that object as a dog. I'm thinking of like the fine distinction between, let's say, a big dog and a wolf, right? Like there are specific features that differentiate those two stimuli. If you're just looking at a picture, they're running across a field, there are some fine distinctions that there are specific features that would distinguish those two. But imagine if you've pulled everything apart and you're kind of going through a features list and you're like match, 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 match. I still don't know if this is a dog or a wolf that I'm seeing, right? Ultimately, you're going to come to some features that you might notice are different. It might be the ultimate size of the dog. A wolf compared to most dogs is bigger. It could be the gait, the style of running that the wolf's engaging in. It could be the fact that it's not alone. Maybe it has its pack mates with it. And there's like these factors, these features that would allow you to ultimately distinguish two very close things from each other. And so that's where that overlapping features, you want to pick the object. You want to say it's probably whatever has the most overlapping features. So back to the proof is out there show. A lot of times they settle on, well, I really don't know what it is. And they'll say, so right now we're going to call it an unidentified flying object because we don't know what it is. And so for a person listening, sometimes that overlaps very nicely with their interpretation that it's probably alien, right? Not all unidentified flying objects are alien though, right? They might be just something that's flying and you don't know what it is. That's the definition of an unidentified flying object. But they, in the analysis, will go through, okay, does a known aircraft move in this way? Does a known aircraft use that kind of propulsion? Does a known aircraft have that kind of, paint job? These kinds of things. They'll go through this, basically comparing the features of the thing in the evidence, in usually videos, with known objects, right? And that's how you kind of can drill down. What am I looking at? What am I experiencing? What is this thing? And that's the analysis by synthesis model in a nutshell. Is basically, you're going to break it down into its features, compare those features to your knowledge base of features, and then try and pick the object, that matches it the most closely. Again, context is going to provide key information. In both of these models, context is going to be key. It always is, though, in all of our perceptions. So all the things I said when we were talking about template theory hold true for the analysis by synthesis as far as those context cues. I'm going to add on here another aspect of context, and this is, trying to figure out the size of something, right? How do you know how far away something is and how big it is? That's a big one on these UFO videos. Is it actually a larger object that's farther away, or is it a smaller object that's close up? Because if it's something closer, like let's say it's so small and close that it might be a bug, yeah, they do move in ways that our regular planes can't do, right? If it's farther away and it's bigger, okay, now we have a problem. How's it moving like that, right? So distance is an important factor in trying to figure out what you're looking at. In all cases, I'm just giving you this outlandish one, but in all cases. So let's check. I'll keep talking while you stare at that circle in the middle of this image. And I'll keep talking a little bit about why distance is an important factor. So we want to, for example, with the moon illusion, we want to know, does the moon actually get bigger when it's closer to the horizon? Well, we actually need to know how far away that moon is before we can make any judgments about how big it should look, right? If it is 100,000 miles away and it looks at, okay, now you're looking at the screen, you should be seeing an after image. Go ahead and look down at your desk for a second while that after image is still there. Like, look down at something that's closer than your screen, and you should see that the flag maintains proportionate size as you move your eyes around. So it looks bigger if you look farther away. It looks smaller if you look close up. That's how our retina works, right? It collects information that is relative size to what was projected to us. And if you put it onto a different background that's closer to you or farther away, it goes ahead and spreads out because it's like, okay, well, now I'm covering that object. So you can't rely on your eyes necessarily by themselves, what's being collected by your retina, to impose any kind of meaning about distance. You have to figure that out from context. So that's the important thing that I want to convey about that moon illusion. If you think that the moon's only 100,000 miles away from us, and then it looks like that on the horizon, you're like, wow, it must be really big. If you know, in fact, that it's like 800 or 900 miles away, something between that. Now it looks really big because you're like, wow, it's so far away and it still looks that big compared to this house, right? You kind of need to know how close the trees are to you to get a good estimate of how big they are, these kinds of things. Like, we need information about distance a lot of the time when we're judging objects. Another aspect of context would be the expectations that you're holding. Like, sometimes when you're in a particular context, you expect certain things to happen. And when you're in a different context, you expect different things to happen. So if you're sitting in a college classroom, you don't really expect, like, a marching band to come inside, right? You don't really expect that. And so if that were to happen, it would be sort of like, what do I want to say? It would kind of take you off guard. And it would muddle your ability to understand what's going on. Those kinds of unexpected things can cloud our judgment about what we're experiencing. It can cloud our interpretation of the objects that we're trying to label. So expectations are a really big, important thing. So here is a study where Group A saw the image on the left, Group B saw the image on the right. And then both groups saw this image, and they were asked to label, what do you see? And people who saw a man playing a saxophone first said, I see a sax player. Those who saw a picture of a woman said, I saw a woman. In that middle picture, they're saying, I clearly see a woman. Now, I think we could agree that in that middle picture, the woman is barely hinted at, whereas the saxophone player is pretty clear. So for a person to say, first and foremost, the first thing I'm seeing in that picture in the middle is I see a woman, really shows you expectation, right? That that first picture primed them. That's a term we use to describe times when we give you some kind of hint or prompt to get you thinking about something, and then we see if you actually process information related to that thing faster. So we primed with a picture of a woman, and then we showed an ambiguous picture that actually is leaning a little closer to sax player than woman. If you say you see a woman, clearly you were primed, and you are expecting to see stuff related to a woman because that's what you saw before. So expectations can literally cloud your judgment, right? Now, the retinal image that's being collected is the same in that center picture. Whether you saw a sax player first or you saw a woman first, that middle picture is the same object. So it's not that there's some kind of bias in the object, it's your expectations clouding your judgment that now makes you predisposed to see it as a woman. So that's what we mean by expectations, right? Another factor is social perceptions, right? So you may have been trained, not on purpose, but just as a function of having been raised in a certain social milieu to perceive things in certain ways. So here we have two houses, right? And you may be predisposed to think one looks better, one maybe should be worth more, these kinds of things, right? Based on your expectations about what a good and valuable house might look like, right? You might have been raised to think about women in a particular way. I'm just putting this picture up because this was Charlie's Angels of the 1970s, and I was, at a critical moment of child development when this show was on, and posters all over the place of these actresses and so on. And there was, like, people of my age have internalized body image issues having to do with this being sort of like the social milieu about what makes an attractive woman. So this is what we're talking about as far as like social perceptions can affect how you recognize patterns, attractive or not, these kinds of things. They did a study about 15 years ago. I should have looked it up for you guys and put it on the slide, but I didn't think of it before, where they had men who were in romantic relationships with women look at either the Sears catalog or the Victoria's Secret catalog for like 30 minutes. And then they were shown a picture of their girlfriend or wife, and they rated the attractiveness of their girlfriend or wife. And what they found is that after flipping through the Sears catalog, girlfriends and wives rated higher than when the participants had flipped through the Victoria's Secret catalog. So these kinds of social perceptions can actually cloud the way that we are identifying the objects around us, right? The people or the car that we want or other kinds of things. Now in class, and we can't do this given our online situation, but in class I break students into two groups, and one group writes a story that completes this one. So it was a dark and misty night as Sandy ran across campus. A street light cast the shadow of another person close behind. With heart pounding, Sandy accelerated away from the pursuer and headed for the dorm. So half of the class is assigned to work on a story that would complete that. The other half of the class is assigned this one. It was a dark and stormy night. Chris was alone in the apartment laundry room. The lights flickered, and there was the shadow of a person in the doorway. Well, because we've been talking about expectations and stuff like that, a lot of times the students try to not write a story that would fulfill like the obvious expectation of something scary happening. Almost always it ends with like a joke or a misunderstanding. Oh, it turned out to be, Chris's roommate, or it turned out to be somebody trying to return something that Sandy had dropped while jogging on campus. So, they try and do that kind of turn. But what's really interesting is almost always Sandy is a female in the stories. About 75% of the time, Chris is a female in the stories. These are gender neutral names, and so social expectations make it such that you might have a gendered interpretation of who Sandy is and who Chris is, right? So when I give them this prompt and they write these stories, they try to avoid the obvious expectation, oh, it's going to be something scary, and they instead fall right into my trap of gender expectations, right? That they may assume that Sandy must be female because Sandy's being chased across campus. Chris is probably female because Chris is doing laundry. So kind of always gratifying to trap the students into an incorrect interpretation. But it's a good one. It illustrates the social perception. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here. We'll pick up in the next one and talk a little bit about visual search tasks.